These are a few practice problems for you to complete before we get started with our notes today. So I'm going to pause the video, go ahead and complete these problems. Here's what you should have gotten for your answers. For each one, check your answers. Let me know if you have any questions on those. This video is on the Pythagorean theorem. Pythagorean theorem helps you solve for sides in a triangle. Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. In a right triangle, the side that's across from the 90-degree angle is called the hypotenuse. So this would be our hypotenuse. So Pythagorean theorem allows us to solve for the lengths of the sides of a triangle. If we know two of the sides, we can solve for the third side. The c has to always be your hypotenuse. So the number after the equal sign has to be the length of the side across from the 90-degree angle. The a and the b do not matter which order those go in. So if we take a look at example number 1, right here, the side across from the 90-degree angle, the length that is x, that has to be your c. So when I set up my formula, these numbers are your a and b. It doesn't matter which one goes first. So you would do 3 squared plus 4 squared equals c squared. 3 squared plus 4 squared is 25. And then in order to solve for c, you take a square root. So if we have c squared equals 25, we would take the square root of both sides, and c would equal 5. Let's try another example. The side across from the 90 is 18. That has to be your c. So for this one, we have x squared plus 7 squared equals 18 squared. If I simplify this, we would subtract. So here we're going to have, let's put the values in. So we'd have 49 x squared plus 49 equals 324. So I would subtract 49 from both sides, and we would get that x squared equals 275. So if I take the square root of both sides, I would find, you can say here, x equals square root of 275, and then here we would have square root of 25 and the square root of 11. So x would actually equal 5 square root of 11. Remember up here, the square root of 275 is not a perfect square, but it can be broken down like we showed here. And if you remember from algebra, you can break down a perfect square, and you have to ask yourself, what's a perfect square that goes into 275? So that's how we got the 25 and the 11. And that makes 275, and then I can break that down. Square root of 25 is 5. And 11 would be my simplest radical form, so that's how we give our answer in this form. Here are a couple more examples for you to test out. I'm going to pause the video here and let you try to complete these two. So go ahead and try those now. Here's what you should have gotten for your answers. So we set up the problem like this, and you should end up with x squared equals 25, and we square root both of those, so we end up with x equals 5. On this example, we can see our hypotenuse was 10, so we set up the problem this way. We have the 25 plus x squared equals 100, and we're going to take 25 away from each side, so we end up with the square root of x squared equals the square root of 75. We know this isn't a perfect square, but we can break it down further, so we get the square root of 25 and the square root of 3. Square root of 25 is a perfect square, so we can pull the 5 out. This is in its lowest form, so we have to leave that as the square root of 3. So x equals 5 and the square root of 3. Pythagorean triples are 3 side lengths in a triangle that satisfy a squared plus b squared equals c squared. If you have a right triangle, which means you have a triangle that has 90 degrees in it, that has to be true. So if I give you 3 measurements, you can set this up in Pythagorean theorem and see if it's equal. So if I give you 3 numbers, like I said in the previous slide, the side across from 90 has to be the biggest side, which means the 5 has to be my c. So if I set up Pythagorean theorem, we would have 3 squared plus 4 squared equals 5 squared. Remember, it doesn't matter which one's A or B, but C does matter. C is always across from the 90-degree angle. C is always your biggest side. And I get 3 squared plus 4 squared equals 5 squared. So for this, we would end up with 9 plus 16 equals 25. And this equals 25. Right here, the 5 squared. So we'd have 25 equals 25. So this right here is my answer, and my answer is yes. This would be a right triangle. In this example with 8, 15, and 17, C is 17 because that's our largest number. So if I set up Pythagorean theorem, we would have 8 squared plus 15 squared equals 17 squared. And I simplified this 8 squared plus 15 squared. So if we write these down, we'd have 64 plus 225, and that actually equals 289. And 17 squared also equals 289. So we would say 289 equals 289, and this one would also be yes. It is also a right triangle. In example 3, we have 8, 15, and 2. My C value is 15 because that's my largest number. So if I set up Pythagorean theorem, we would have 8 squared plus 2 squared equals 15 squared. I get 8 squared plus 2 squared, which is 68, so we can write that down and say 64 plus 4 would be 68. And we know that 15 squared is 225. So when we set this up, we're saying 68. We know, obviously, that is not equal to 225. So I would cross out the equal sign because they are not equal. So it's definitely not a right triangle. But if your C squared is bigger, you have an obtuse triangle, which means you have one angle bigger than 90. So we can just write for this one, obtuse. For our next example, if I set this one up, my C value is 13. So I would get 7 squared plus 11 squared equals 13 squared. So when we calculate this, we would have 49 plus 121 equals 169. This here would equal 170, and we know that this is 169. Okay, so these obviously are not equal once again, but this time my C squared is smaller. So you have an acute triangle, which all angles are less than 90. So we can just write in for this one, acute. In this picture right here, you have two variables, x and y. So you're going to have to do Pythagorean theorem twice. So if I look at this triangle here on the left side, I'm going to use the 8, the x, and the 17 first. So I'll set up Pythagorean theorem. So we have 8 squared plus x squared equals 17 squared. Remember, your hypotenuse is across from the 90-degree angle. That has to be your C. If I set that up, we're going to get 64 plus x squared equals 289. So if I subtract 64, take the square root of both sides, and you would end up with x equals 15. And that would be our value for x. So 15 is the x length, and we can now use that, the 15 and the 25, to solve for our y. This y over here is this triangle's hypotenuse. So it's the C value. So I'll set up Pythagorean theorem. So we should have 15 squared, which was our x value, plus 25 squared equals y squared. So we get 225 plus 625 equals y squared. So once I take the square root of both sides, these would cancel, so y would equal the square root of 850, and that is not a perfect square, so it needs to be broken down. So we would break that down into square root of 25 and square root of 34. The square root of 25 is 5, and the square root of 34 cannot be broken down, so our answer would be 5 times square root of 34. So that's what we would give for our answer. So now we're on to our last example, which is a story problem, and it says there is a fire on the 3rd story, which is 30 feet, and the ladder is 46 feet long. Where do you place the base of the ladder? So we have a picture here. So this story problem right here is a right triangle situation. If this is 90, this could be considered my ground, so my horizontal, my flat surface. Your building would go straight up, vertical with the ground. And then if you think about placing a ladder to the building, to the bottom of the ladder is to the ground, and the top of the ladder is to the building. So C would be your ladder. So the fire is on the 3rd story, which is 30 feet. So this is where you'd want to reach your ladder. So we would put 30 here. The ladder is 46 feet long, and it says where would you place the base of the ladder. So I'm trying to figure out if this is the bottom of the building, where do I put this? So we should have our 46 here. And so how far away? So this is our x. So we would place that there. So if we set up Pythagorean theorem, go ahead and try that and see if you can solve for this problem. This is what you should have gotten for your answer. X would be approximately 34.9 feet, And in a story problem, you don't need to leave it in the simplest radical form. You can just round to the nearest tenths place.